Hey guys, how's it going? Michael Troy here. I am very excited for today's comic chat. This is a long time coming. I get to chat and get to know a little better one of the artists I've been working with for a while and someone that I've admired for even longer. One of the best artists I know, working in underground independent comic books. A huge lover of comics like me. We have a lot of the same interests and common ground in comic books. So it is very exciting for me to talk to Barry Dan today. I'm very excited to be with the artist from Singapore. How are you?
Hey Michael, thanks for having me. I'm the distant cousin of Philip Tan and Billy Tan, who does Spirit of the Tao for Top Cow Comics way back then.
Well, I guess it's a lucky name then. Like if your last name is Tan, then you're destined to be like a really amazing comic book artist. So I suppose we should start at the beginning. So so you're from Singapore. You're in Singapore right now, and it's 1 a.m. in the morning. Forgive me for making you stay up so late for this, but I really appreciate it. Um,
Sure.
so what was your introduction to comic books? When did you start reading them? How were you given the gift of comic books in your life?
Yeah, so I think the very first comic I read was a 1976 annual, Avengers annual that was drawn by John Buscema. So it came in like this hardcover collection, and it collected a couple of issues. There was like Archon the Thunderer and the Female Liberators. So it was drawn by John Buscema and inked by Tom Palmer, I think. And so that was my very first introduction. But the very first single comic that I got was Legends #4 by John Byrne. So that was when I was introduced to Darkseid, Jack Kirby's Fourth World, and most of the DC universe. Yeah, so that was probably my first exposure to comics. And then the 80s were a great time for action adventure cartoons, like He-Man, Thundercats, GI Joe. So the UK would have reprints of the Marvel comics for this different cartoon series. So that was kind of my way into comics as well. I kind of followed the cartoons and got into comics, and yeah, that was my pretty much my first exposure to comic books.
And it was love at first sight. I mean, that's kind of crazy because I know the Avengers you're talking about, and I feel like that's a very like kind of famous, notorious cover with the female liberators. And then your second comic book is Legends by John Byrne, which very interestingly was his introduction to DC, even before he left Marvel to go to DC to revamp Superman. And they launched his introduction to DC with that Legends miniseries. So that's very interesting. Everyone knows I love John Byrne. Uh, so
Yeah,
what was your impression of these comic books?
for me, I mean, it's kind of like comics were portable entertainment because the cartoons themselves, you know, even if you like the particular episode, you weren't quite sure when they were going to rerun that episode. But for comics, it's portable entertainment. I would kind of carry them with me, wherever I went, and I would read the same old comics over and over again. But that issue of Legends #4 kind of brought me into the whole. There was the superpowers toy line going on at the time. So Darkseid, Desart, and Caliban, and some of the Fourth World characters um, were some of the toys that they produced. So that book kind of linked me to the toy line as well. And I think for many years after discovering, Legends and Silver Surfer and all that, my taste actually skewed more towards the cosmic part, or the more yeah, the space or cosmic related books, rather than the more street level stuff like Daredevil or Spider-Man. Yeah, so that kind of formed my early interest. And interestingly enough, my second comic was actually an issue of Silver Surfer by Jim Starlin and drawn by Ron Lim. So that was the first part of Return of Thanos. So between Legends #4 and that issue of Silver Surfer, I actually thought that Darkseid and Thanos was basically the same characters. I thought that Darkseid had a wardrobe change, and he got the spiffy new hover chair because they kind of looked alike. So those were the kind of comics that really got me hooked because they were kind of more interesting than the action adventure cartoons. They went a bit deeper. They were a bit more complex than He-Man or Thundercats. And yeah, that's when the love of or my love of comics really started
taking shape. What did you say? You said something that that was so interesting to me. But the fact that it's so obvious, and I am like this years old when you just made me realize that, because Marvel and DC always have their like sort of doppelgangers or their avatars of each other's characters, and obviously Thanos is Marvel's dark side. And I never like put the characters together, and they're so much the same. I love it. Like you could easily change their costume and like almost make them the same character, except of course for that god awful chin on Thanos. But that is like really funny. Yeah. So did that turn into your love of Kirby when, because obviously you just came on. Barry's worked a lot, and he's been part of like fan fiction and like things like that, but also publishing his own comic books, and the latest one being How to Feud the Marvel Way, which I reviewed on my channel, which chronicles the feud between Jack, or a relationship between Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. I said it, and other people have said it's a very sort of fair kind of expose on the situation, trying to like show both sides of the story and everything like that. And I know your love of Kirby is very much tied to his New Gods. So was that like because of Legends, or how did that evolve?
Yeah, I think John Byrne kind of reintroduced Jack Kirby's Fourth World to a new generation of readers in the 80s, right? Because Darkseid was a recurring villain in his run on Superman. So that's how I kind of was exposed to Jack Kirby's Fourth World stuff. And later on, I think in the mid-90s, John Byrne had a run on Jack Kirby's Fourth World. So I really started getting into the whole mythology. And around that time, they started reprinting the original Fourth World series like New Gods, Forever People, Mr. Miracle, in this really cheap black and white newsprint trade paperbacks, right? Because back then, they weren't sure that Jack Kirby's Fourth World actually deserved that sort of full color deluxe treatment. So I kind of got into the Jack Kirby books that way, but that was not my first exposure to Jack Kirby. So I think the very first my very first Jack Kirby comic was a reprint book by Applause Books. So it was this Fantastic Four book that collected, a couple of Fantastic Four issues. It had this painted cover, I think, by Earl Norem. So it was the Fantastic Four, kind of in an action pose on top of the Fantastic car. And they reprinted the first issue of Fantastic Four, one of the Inhumans issue, and then a third issue by Marv Wolfman and Keith Pollard, I think, was the artist. So I kept coming back, or I kept revisiting, the Jack Kirby stories in that particular book. So Jack Kirby's art kind of, there's a lot of people who think that Jack Kirby is a quiet taste, right? They got more into Kirby stuff later on, after kind of, maybe their friends recommending them and them kind of taking a deeper look into the Jack Kirby stuff. But, early comments by a lot of people was that, Jack Kirby's anatomy is a bit wonky and all that. So some people kind of took a while to get into Jack Kirby stuff. But for me, I think right from the start, seeing those old Fantastic Four comics, I got into Jack Kirby in a big way. His art just seemed more exciting. So between the three stories that was collected in that book, right, I never revisited, or I didn't feel the urge to revisit the Marv Wolfman story because it was just really boring to me. But the Jack Kirby story with the Inhumans, in terms of the character designs, the sort of action, the concepts that he was, introducing in those books, those were very compelling to me. So that was my first real exposure to Kirby, and then I got into the Fourth World, in a big way, and the Fourth World remains my single favorite Jack Kirby work.
I know. I am of the weird fan that I feel like there's two groups of people: the people who always knew how amazing Jack Kirby was, and the people like me who sort of came into comics on people like John Byrne and George Perez and um, all these Michael Golden and all these Art Adams and all these like really great like sort of new wave of artists. And then I see Kirby and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's horrifying. Like that looks ugly and old. It looks like something my dad would read, you know, and it was something my dad would read. So read, come to find out. But anyway, and then of course, I don't know when this switch flips, but now, it's like I can't get enough of Kirby, undeniable genius, like could study his art forever and a day. When did you start noticing like artists by name or style or like getting into that or you know
I think Jack Kirby and John Byrne were probably the first artists that I kind of got into. So, I would follow them from book to book. Um, and probably the third one would be Frank Miller. So I got into Frank Miller in a big way, probably, in the early 90s, all the way through to um, DK2. Then after that, Frank Miller kind of evolved in certain ways. So, in terms of his storytelling and all that, I wasn't that enamored. But for a long time, for maybe like a 10-year period, I felt that Frank Miller was basically at the apex of, comics making. Everything that he touched from 300 to Sin City, basically, I was a fan of. So those were probably the three favorite artists that I really got into. And in terms of, our favorite artists, I think the one common thing is always the artists that we gravitate to are those with very, very distinctive style, be it John Romita Jr. or John Byrne, Walt Simonson, and all that. And the interesting thing about Kirby is that he kind of went beyond that, right? Very few, I mean, there are a lot of great artists with very distinctive art styles. John Byrne, Frank Miller, Jim Lee, even. But Jack Kirby kind of went beyond that because Jack Kirby essentially created his own visual language. And what I mean by that, for example, if you were to take or if you were to see a John Byrne page from afar, right, you could probably tell it's a John Byrne page, having been a fan of John Byrne. But if you were to isolate the incidental elements, like maybe a building, bricks, or various cityscapes, perhaps you can't tell for certain it's John Byrne, right? It could be Tom Grummett or it could be Dan Jurgens. But the difference between Kirby and the other artists is essentially every small incidental element in the Jack Kirby comic looks like it was drawn. You know that it was drawn by Jack Kirby, right? The leaves, axe, fingers, fire, water, everything goes through the sort of Kirby prism. So what he presents for me is really an entirely internally consistent designer reality through his comics. And very few artists are really able to achieve that. There are two that I can think of at the top of my head. One is, of course, Jack Kirby. The other is Mike Mignola, who is a student of Jack Kirby. So if you look at a Mike Mignola comic, right, a skull, a brick, explosions, you can tell that those are Mike Mignola trademarks, even if you were to identify kind of incidental visual elements. And that's the same with Kirby. So these really are the two artists I believe that kind of transcended the field and created designer realities of their own. So I would really pack them, really at the top of the heap, above and beyond a lot of the comic book legends that, I follow, like Walt Simonson, John Byrne, and all that. But Jack Kirby kind of pushed things a step further visually, I felt.
Something I thought of when you were talking is you bring up a very good and interesting point about art and artists. Like Kirby's anatomy, I guess, is questionable, but like you said, it's Kirby anatomy made up for a Kirby world. And as long as you're consistent within your like style, is if if your arm is shorter than it should be, as long as you always make it shorter than it should be, then you're in good shape. You know what I mean? Like if it's because if you're inconsistent and it's just bad drawing, that's not style. You know what I mean? But
Exactly. Exactly. So it all holds together, right? Because he plays by his rules and he establishes certain visual rules and he plays by them. So kind of it works in the Jack Kirby comic, right? Outside of that, not everybody can kind of make it work. There are a lot of Jack Kirby clones, people who work in that style, but they don't push it the way Jack Kirby does, and it all hangs together, even with the ultra exaggerated anatomy, the wonky fingers, the stubby little fingers, and all that. Everything just seemed to coalesce into a very consistent artistic vision.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like there's not a ton of Jack Kirby clones, and you would think there would be a lot more. I mean, obviously, Tom Scioli comes to mind. I see a lot of Kirby influence in Eric Larson's art. I would say that that's probably his number one artistic influence from my point of view, what I see. However, it is so different from Kirby. I mean, he is so distinctly Eric Larson, you know what I mean? But it's kind of interesting because, and I think it also speaks to what you said, just the genius of Kirby, like how, like his pencil, like whatever he draws, it just looks so distinctly Kirby and so like imaginative and different. So if someone's trying to clone him, I think it's like, because like Jim Lee, I feel like there's, Jim Lee is the artist who launched 1,000 clones, and uh, but I feel like, but I guess you could say the same thing about Kirby. No one can really match it, so it doesn't really pose a threat. I guess I don't know. Does that make any
I
sense?
mean, Brett Booth is a decent artist, but you know, kind of he doesn't measure up to Jim Lee, right, in a lot of ways. But he's a perfectly competent artist, but there's just something missing, right? Like Jim Lee would be the originator of the style. Everybody that followed in that sort of style, it would be second best, right? Same thing with Kirby, Rick Buckler, Keith Giffen, and all that. They kind of work in that sort of Kirby style, but I don't think anybody has been able to completely kind of harness it the way Kirby does in terms of making that sort of visual impact.
Yeah, that's an interesting point also about comic book art in general. It's like because Kirby was successful and he did build the house of ideas with Stan, most certainly visually, like 100%. And so they developed the Marvel House style and encouraged everyone to sort of draw like Kirby, which was interesting, you know what I mean? So I feel like there a lot of flat art came out of that. And I feel like it wasn't really until people started just like leaning into their own style and just like going for it and being allowed to experiment and getting like the Bill Sienkiewicz's and the Mike Mignolas and the Ted McKeevers, if you will, the different artists who really break the mold of comic book art, that it sort of exploded in a way that really validated the art form, if that makes sense. I don't know. Like, I mean, it's always a valid art form, but I feel like, getting some really killer art has definitely helped for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right because I mean, in the early days, like you mentioned, Stan kind of made artists like John Buscema, Sal Buscema, and all that followed in the tradition of the Jack Kirby action storytelling style, which was great for a certain period of time. But then artists like Frank Miller, Bill Sienkiewicz, and all the rest came in and brought their own styles, right? And that really blew the doors open. And they kind of went beyond that very generic um, action storytelling sort of Kirby style and moved into different dimensions. And I think that the industry got a lot more interesting, when fresher artists and all that kind of brought their own flavors into the mix rather than follow that sort of Kirby school of drawing slavishly. So yeah, I would agree with whatever you've mentioned.
So when did your artistic inclination or talent kick in? Was it comics that made you want to draw, or were you artistic prior to that?
So I think I pretty much, at maybe age 4 and all that, I've been dabbling in drawing and all that. Um, so a lot of it was comics based, or influenced by Star Wars. So, for a period of maybe like for the first 2 to 3 years, I would be drawing nothing but ninjas, dinosaurs, my own Star Wars space battles and all that. A little later after that, I probably got more into um, copying panels from various comic books, kind of, doing my own rip-off of Jack Kirby characters and all that. And it wasn't until my teen years where I really started um, kind of getting into very specific artists and trying to reverse engineer some of the things that I liked about their work. So probably when I was 16, one of my favorite artists during this period was Walt Simonson. So he was launching his new Orion series at the time, and I actually spent 2 months kind of just getting into his stuff and trying to break down, how he would compose a scene, or how he would, ink various panels, or how he would kind of approach panel design and all that. So I got into that. Then, I started maybe dissecting things a bit further in terms of exploring certain styles, like Frank Miller's Sin City style and all that. But what I do is really a combination of um, both going through the comics, right, and reading and kind of immersing myself in their artwork, and also tracking down whatever interviews I can find with those artists, because it's true, interviews like those that they've done in Comics Journal and all that, you gain certain insights into their creative process, how they kind of break down a scene, what is the kind of yeah kind of their more personal thoughts, rather than, because looking at the artwork, you can only infer up to a certain point, but so you also need that sort of insights that they bring or they offer through the interviews to kind of have the complete picture. So I got really into kind of dissecting different artists and their styles, I think, in my teen years, and I still enjoy doing that actually, right? So, the various comic assignments that I've taken on, whatever I've done for the various anthologies, usually I kind of have a creative concept in mind, like maybe, for this Ghost Asian story, I'm going to kind of do a riff on Kirby and Ditko. So what I'll do is kind of almost like method cartooning, right? I would just immerse myself in Kirby and Ditko comic books um, to a certain degree, and then I would approach the page and just kind of let it out, and whatever comes out on the page is my own synthesis of whatever comics I've absorbed. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Like I did a Spawn Pit kind of mashup for Darker Image. And I actually bought the entire run of Pit before, drawing that pin up. So I'm not sure it really added into it, but one thing that I like to do is really the research, right? Because it gives me the excuse to kind of read a whole bunch of comics and then incorporate whatever I have into, the overall artistic toolbox. And if I study, artists like Kirby or Frank Miller and all that, and if whatever I glean is even like 2% of what they're able to bring to the page, that's something that you can add to your kind of artistic toolkit, and it informs your work in certain ways that you may not even think about until further down the line.
So, were you making any comics before? I discovered your work and probably met you through your work on Darkest Image, the fan anthology that's like a tribute to the early years of Image Comics. Was that your first comics work, or were you doing anything before that?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of random projects before that, but those were for my personal consumption, right? So I never did a print run of those comics. And I recall my earliest comic book efforts was really trying to do my own conclusion to the Fourth World Saga. So, I would try to kind of wrap things up, and do that fabled final battle between Darkseid and Orion in the fire pits. But the early comics, I probably 90% of the comics I never got to finish. So I usually get excited about kind of, doing my own sci-fi comic or my own conclusion to Jack Kirby's Fourth World or my Witchblade mini comic. And in the end, it kind of didn't materialize. It was only when I got older, um, that I kind of developed the discipline to just sit down and, you know, kind of put in the hours to get something done. So that was probably during the COVID era, that I started to actually finish the projects that I embarked on. And that led to, the Darker Image anthologies, Ghost Agents, and of course, the work that we've done together for the Big Bang anthology.
Yes, your contributions, we'll get there, of course, but your contributions to the Big Bang, Big Bang anthology are just incredible and amazing. So you're one of the most amazing stories from Darkest Image is, of course, your contribution is the Street Angel Billy Kincaid story that caught the attention of Street Angel's creator, Jim Rugg. It's beautifully illustrated. It not only is it in Darkest Image, it's also in your Comic Cavalcade collection, correct? So I'll put a link in the description of the video where you can get this book because it's a must-see. All of Barry's stuff is amazing, so you definitely should get it. Available through Cosmic Lion Productions. Hi, Eli. And so anyway, what was the inspiration for that story? Like, it is so good. It is such a genius idea. Billy Kincaid being the ice cream man slash pedo, child killer meets Street Angel. I mean, it's so genius. So what was your inspiration?
Yeah, I just I wanted to do something with Jim Rugg's Street Angel. So I kind of got into Jim Rugg's art, in a big way. So through the Cartoonist Kayfabe channel, I started exploring, or I started picking up more comics from both Ed as well as Jim. But the very first Street Angel comics that I picked up were those that were released from Image Comics. So those were supposed to be a bit more, I guess, geared towards young adults. And I thought those were interesting, but I didn't really get into it. But then I read the original Street Angel miniseries, I think by Slave Labor Graphics. And that really got me hooked. That and Super Mac, which was a great showcase of the sort of diversity of Jim's, the art styles that he's able to kind of bring to bear. So I think it's a combination of those two that made me want to kind of just do a short story on Street Angel. I wanted to I think the genesis of the story was really inserting Street Angel into the Image universe, right, and do a fun little story. So I figured, probably the world's deadliest kid, a good matchup would be, a kitty killer like Billy Kincaid. So I think, I kind of took that idea and I ran with it, and it all made sense because I think Street Angel is based in a city called Angel City, I think, or something to that degree. So it kind of makes sense that Billy Kincaid, or the demonic version of Billy Kincaid, would be sent by Malbolgia to a city called Angel City to kind of wreak havoc and all that, to kind of paint the town red. So I took all those various elements and just came out with what I thought would be a fun story to illustrate. And yeah, I think I was very lucky that that story kind of caught the attention of Jim. And yeah, I would say I was pretty happy overall with the concept. I actually had a sequel in mind for that Street Angel story. It was going to be called Street Angel Younger's Blood. So it was going to take place after the Billy Kincaid story, and basically the overall concept of the story was that Youngblood wanted to recruit Street Angel, and bring her into the fold, and she would be going up against, or she would be trained by the Lee version of Chapel. So he would put her through her paces, and in the end, basically you realize that actually Street Angel is deadlier than the entire Youngblood put together, right? So there would be like this big fight, she would take down Chapel and the whole Youngblood team and then burn the entire headquarters down. So that was the overall concept, and that was the second story that I had in mind that I thought would be a good fit for future Darkest Image anthologies. But I kind of I never had the chance to develop it beyond that idea. But yeah, I had it planned out, and I think I even went into. I have the layout somewhere, so I laid out like maybe 14 pages. It was going to be a longer story and a continuation of the Billy Kincaid story.
I was gonna say that if Jim Rock ever wants to publish a crazy story, it sounds like he's got one halfway there. But I realize with Youngblood tied up in copyright hell, that's probably not a possibility unless it's a fan concept again. But that sounds super crazy. I can't imagine spending all that time working on it, but I really want to see that. That sounds really great. Um, so I guess Darkest Image, and by the way, I should say that reading the entire run on Pitt isn't such a bad thing because Dale Keown is such an amazing artist. I absolutely love his art. So I can't even remember what issue it went up to, but I don't even think it was super long. Maybe what, 12, 13 issues, or was it?
I think slightly, yeah, probably slightly more than that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, probably 20 issues and all.
So what was it like getting validation and praise from Jim Rock?
Yeah, it was kind of surreal because Jim Rock is an artist that I really admire, right? Having gone through his work in the original Street Angel series, um, and Super Mac and all that. The sort of versatility of Jim, was something that kind of astounded me. He does it all, right. He writes, he draws, he designs, and he puts together his own magazines and mini zines and mini comics and all that. So for me, Jim Rock is really kind of an all rounder. I think more so than many of the creators that I know. So kind of having him reach out and tell me how much he liked the story was really a pretty surreal moment, and to have that story featured on Cartoonist Kayfabe, it was kind of like a pinch me moment, right? Because I think they did a review of the Alan Moore Billy Kincaid in Hell story. So towards the end of the video, Jim kind of slipped the Darkest Image book in, and gave me a shout out on that 4 or 5 page Street Angel story that I did. So yeah, that was really great. I mean, that's kind of a dream come true to have an artist who you admire, like or kind of appreciate the work that you're putting out as well. So for me, that's probably one of the highlights in terms of my comic making. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jim's a great creator. It's like everything you said, he's a great cover artist, he's a great penciler, inker, colorist. He cares about what the whole package looks like. He's very much like into the craft of the physical copies and things like that. I feel so lucky that we were able to get him to do one of the covers for our Big Bang anthology. And he was such a nice guy, so professional. Just I interviewed him for my channel. So interesting to talk to about comics and process and things like that. So he's definitely one of the good guys in comics right now. So where did Darkest Image take you? Because you did a couple of other fan projects, but then I guess it led you to Ghost Agents, one of your bigger projects.
Yeah, so I think what happened originally was Rocco reached out to me about uh, doing this 1963 story with one of the female spy characters who was a kind of an analog for Nick Fury. And I think off the back of that, he kind of brought me into the whole Ghost Agents thing, right? What we did was we kind of retrofitted that story to fit within the Ghost Agents universe. You know, and we've done many versions of that. We've done a trippy version. We've done a black light kind of inspired colored version. Um, and we've done one with just blue tones and all that. But that story really kind of, yeah, through that story, I met up with Rocco, and that's when I started, contributing to the Ghost Agents anthologies um, as well. And for me, the main appeal of that was really um, being part of an anthology with all these great artists, right? You know, Chris Anderson, Ben Perkins, Sam Royale, um, and all that. So for me, that was really what got my interest in terms of wanting to participate in the Ghost Agent stories. And I've I've contributed here and there since then, mostly short stories because of my day job takes up a large chunk of my time. So I've only been able to contribute like probably shorter stories, like maybe 5-page stories, 3-page stories, and all that. But all those have been fun because for each of the stories, usually I start with a certain um, visual concept in mind. So like the first one with the with that trippy Doctor Strange character and the female secret agent. What I wanted to do was basically like a flat out a Kirby Ditko riff. And then the second story was, I wanted to kind of inject some of that Darwin Cook Parker flavor into the second story I did. And the third story was more of a was a coloring experiment. So it was colored in this completely in blue, in different shades of blue and yellow. This was the story with Donna Prentice and the female villain on that island having a, some sort of conversation. And for me, yeah, I kind of approached that story as an experiment in coloring. And I wanted to do the kind of Marie Severin type easy coloring, um, which I did, and I think it probably turned out well, maybe probably the best of the three stories that I contributed. But that's the fun part for me, really being part of a book with all these other great artists and having that sort of freedom to do my own art experiments, right? My only criteria for the assignments I take on is really there needs to be something interesting in there for me. I need to be able to have a certain sort of hook that I can grab onto. Even cover assignments for Ghost Agents. Maybe the central creative concept is I want to do up a cover in the vein of a Drew Struzan poster, and that gives me that sort of forward momentum I need to kind of go through with the project, right? Because it's a lot of research. I need to kind of immerse myself, in this artwork. And then the fun part is synthesizing all that influence and seeing how it translates, to the page. So for me, all these little contributions to the anthologies, I try to keep it different. I play in different styles, and that keeps things interesting for me. And yeah, I would say a lot of that is a direct influence from Jim Ruck and Super Mac, which he did because through that particular publication, I mean it's just amazing the kind of styles the different styles that he worked in. So I took a lot of inspiration from Jim in terms of how I approach or the stories that kind of get my interest and the stories that I'm interested in kind of working on.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to have. It's like because not only do you draw really well, I mean, you're an artist, you just have a really aesthetically pleasing style, but you're always experimenting. You're always bringing in some new technique or texture or effects that you're trying to replicate or maybe haven't done before. And I think that's a sign of if that you're keeping it interesting for yourself, and it keeps it interesting for the readers as well. And by the way, in case anyone doesn't know, Ghost Agents is like this anthology spy comic book published by Cosmic Lion Productions, created by Rocco Jerome. It's an anthology, and it always features like a bunch of killer artists, tons that I totally poached for the Big Bang anthology, which I jokingly say I poached them, but I mean, I already knew a lot of them from Darkest Image and stuff like that. But I mean, hey, if you're gonna make a comic book, there's nothing wrong with trying to use the best artists that you know, right? I can't help
Yeah.
but oh, sorry.
No, yeah, exactly. Um, you did poach them, Michael, I guess. I mean, we were all part of this CKRS group, right? So I'm sure. I think a lot of the artists you worked on with for the Big Bang anthology, those were friendships that you made through the course of like the Batman fan project, or the Darkest Image anthologies as well as Ghost Agent.
It's funny because I have to say that I don't feel I knew you well. And in some ways, I feel like I still don't know you. So I was glad that we were able to do this today because we do talk a lot, but it's always about comics and art. And of course, that's just fine with me because, it's hard to find a nerd who's willing to go so hard on the comic book talk with you. Um, what was the point I was trying to make? Oh, but anyway, so yeah, so a lot of the artists, do work on a lot of the same projects and things like that. But I was really happy to score you because I feel like, of I don't know, like you're just like you remind me of Jay Anacleto. Do you know who Jay Anacleto is? He's
Oh
like
yeah,
this amazing artist who I forgot the name of the book he did. Do you remember it?
Area.
What is it?
It's called Area, right? ARI.
Area, yeah, exactly.
It was for
Eh,
Avalon Studios. That Wills Portacio, uh, Wills Portacio kind of ran and founded Avalon Studios, I think.
but he's like this amazing artist who was a dentist who
Oh yeah,
like did a few like really amazing comic books, but wouldn't go full time because he liked being a dentist too much. And this is at a time like in the 90s when he arguably could have probably gotten rich off of it. I don't think anyone should ditch their dentist career today to become a comic book artist. But I
okay.
just found it kind of interesting that the parallel of, you have a career, this is more or less a hobby for you. However, your skill level is so high that you could pretty much write your career in comics, in my opinion, if you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I spent a whole chunk of time refining, really refining my technique. So I think prior to working on Darkest Image and the various anthologies, I was pretty much a more of a traditional artist. So I work using traditional pen and ink and all of that. And for me, there was a certain satisfaction back then in terms of achieving, the thinnest lines that you can, the sharpest, trying to get the sort of slickest inking you're able to get. And that's very much in the vein of, guys like Brian Boland and Charles Burns, right? For them, I think they're always chasing the perfect line. And that's, that focus on technique was something that was a big part of my comics making in the early days, probably, from when I was a teenager all the way till, I was in my mid 30s. It was really just seeing how I can kind of get those super fine lines using a micron pen. And, the micron pens were never fine enough for me, right? I went from 0.1 to 0.05 to 0.03, but, they were still not fine enough. But back then, it was really me chasing that perfect line. And the contrast and the difference with how I work now, it's more of not just the technique, but uh, kind of considering the various elements from page design to colors to kind of lettering and even the story, how you pace a story, how do you kind of put a certain point across in the most visually interesting way. So I think for the maybe in the past 5 to 6 years, I've had a shift in my focus, and it's more about less about technique and more about, overall storytelling and seeing how best to make an impact through words and pictures.
It's funny when you're talking, it reminds me of like I feel like the evolution as an artist, and I feel like I gleaned a lot of this from some of the conversations I have had. I feel like as a younger artist, and I was always like trying to strive for that perfection that you talk about, but like wanting it immediately, like wanting it to just come out of my hand, and like just being so frustrated and not accepting like ugly art or meeting yourself at the level that you're at. You know what I mean? I talked to like Michel Fife, and I actually, you talk about John Romita Jr. I found it very interesting, and very helpful. And one of the interviews I read with him is that a big influence on his style was uh, using a style that he would be able to achieve drawing a monthly comic book. You know what I mean? So I think sometimes, necessity informs your style as well in a lot of
Yeah,
ways.
I think they call that the deadline style, right?
The deadline style, I like that. Yeah, I'm sure it's funny because I'm sure artists do have different styles, like for different art. Like when Jim Lee was doing his Frank Miller style for Death Blow, I'm sure. I mean, I'm wondering if that's faster or not, because it's like he knows how to draw like Jim Lee, but
Yeah.
if you're like trying to emulate Frank Miller, you might have to stop and think about it. You know what I mean? So that'd be interesting. I'd love to talk to him about it. Jim, are you watching? Come on my show. So another one of your projects that was very good that I love, that is like hysterical and beautifully drawn, is Splitting Image. What is your story called? Because it's a sequel to, it's a bootleg sequel to Splitting Image, the brilliant two-part miniseries from Don Simpson in the 90s that really lampooned Image Comics, but it was published by Image Comics. All the creators, and sort of chronicling their move to Marvel Comics. And it was just so funny, so scathing. Like nobody does humor better than Don Simpson in that environment. And so what inspired you to want to do a sequel to that? And where did that originally appear? I know it's in your comic Cavalcade, but I feel like it was an ash can before that or something.
I think the first yeah, I think it first appeared in Contraband Comics Cavalcade, but simultaneously I kind of came up with the ash can that was given as a pretty much a giveaway for those who purchased Contraband Comics Cavalcade. So I think the genesis of the story was really me just wanting to mix things up again. I wanted to do something because there was Darkest Image, and then there was Darker Image 2. So I wanted to do something for Darkest Image 2, and that was kind of the genesis of me coming up with this sequel to Don Simpson's Splitting Image. But I wanted to kind of work on a story that I felt qualified to tell, right? Because I know the history of the Image founders so well. I know Rob Liefeld and his history with Image Comics, with Awesome Comics, and even how he became a podcaster and all that. So I wanted to take all that sort of behind the scenes stuff and meld it into some sort of a parody. In terms of the art style, I would say that I was pretty faithful to Don Simpson's style, but I added a bit more realism in the feature. So it was this odd mix of Don Simpson and maybe Jack Davis in terms of the faces. And I thought that would be a good story, because the thing about working on different stories and or your own comics and all that, the things that gets me excited is really the high concept, right? Like is there an angle? Is there a commercial angle to it? Is there anything that can hook potential readers? So even like the new Stan versus Jack book, for me to dedicate that sort of time to put together that project, it needed to have kind of a hook or commercial angle. It needed to be interesting to me, and I wanted it to be interesting to new readers as well who maybe got into the Marvel universe and thought that Stan Lee was the be all and all. So when I develop a story, what I usually do is to kind of figure out what's the hook of the story. And for me, I thought that the hook of the story, doing a sequel to Splitting Image, there was potential in that, and making it less about the parody of the Image characters and more about the Image creators themselves. I thought that differentiated it from the original Splitting Image series. And yeah, the hook for me was just like this beachy tell all parody story, something that would be fun, and very inside baseball for myself to do and for others, or for my peers to read. So yeah, I would say that was the genesis, and more or less, I think you'll find that most of the stories that I work on, there's an element of subversive humor in there. So that particular story allowed me to kind of just be as caustic and subversive as I could be, right? With all these parodies of the Image founders.
Well, when I reviewed it, I also couldn't. I felt like there was a slight Drew Friedman influence on the art as well, and subversive humor. It is so biting, hilarious, and just like almost scathing in a way. I love it though. Like it is, but it's. I feel like it's done with so much love and reverence, and um, it's the perfect sequel 30 years later to Splitting Image. I think even Don Simpson himself said he couldn't have done it better, and it very much reminded me of like a VH1 kind of like behind the music sort of documentary, like, like we get to see where they are now. And I don't know, I just feel like you kind of let everyone have it in a way that they deserved it. And it wasn't too bad, but it was kind of biting in a way. And I just think it's a great read and it's really beautifully drawn. So I invite everyone to seek it out and read it if you were alive during the Image exodus and aware of all that drama. It's such a fun little anecdote.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
think you're pretty spot on. It's basically a love letter to the Image founders, even though it's also pretty scathing and all that. And the Drew Friedman part that you talked about, that was true for the Ash Can, because I wanted to do something different for the Ash Can. So what I did was to add another layer of stippling, like a Drew Friedman inspired layer of stippling, to the Ash Can version of the story. So yeah, you're actually completely right. And the VH1 thing that you mentioned, yeah, that's exactly the tone that I wanted to go for. Yeah.
well, mission accomplished. It's sublime. I love it. So for Barry Tan Completists, we have Darkest Image 2, your contributions to Ghost Agents. You also contributed to Weapon X, the fan remake of the Barry Windsor Smith's Weapon X. See, this is kind of when I like this is during the pandemic and people are doing these books and stuff like that. And I'm sort of coming in a little late. Like I missed the boat on Darkest Image, but I was I was so there for this. I was like, this is exactly something I need. I need something creative to get me going and be part of. And I love that these books exist. They're so much fun. Then there was the Batman Year One fan
Yep.
recreation. We're both part of that. Um, they did a color version and a black and white version. Are you on both?
Yeah, I'm on both. I wasn't actually on the Wolverine project. So the two projects that I missed, I think we both missed Image Grand Design.
Yes.
That was the first CKRS project. And I kind of missed the boat on the Wolverine Weapon X one, but I did get into the Batman Year One, both the black and white and colored version.
um, uh, which is so great. Like the Batman or the David Mazzucchelli artist edition just came out, and it was so kind of fun just to see the original pages of the pages that we parodied. So that was another layer of fun for it to the book for me because it's a beautiful book. Everyone's like raving about it, and I feel like it's highly sought after. Do you have your copy yet?
No, I actually don't. So I saw the review. I have my copy pre-ordered, but it hasn't shipped yet. So I've been holding my comic shop for for updates, basically for the whole of the last 2 weeks.
Does
You
it
know,
take a long time to get stuff? Do you get stuff a lot later than we do, or?
no, I don't think so. I think we get it in the same week, but there's just been some delays in the shipment. So that is a book that I'm really, really looking forward to. I mean, David Mazzucchelli is a modern master, and the thing that surprised me from your review of the artist edition was he was just 25 when he worked on Batman Year One. So that's to me that's crazy. He was already at the apex of his abilities when he was 25. So, David Mazzucchelli is another artist that's, just a true master.
Yeah, he is. I know he's just one of those artists that has the mad respect and love of everyone, and
Were you
deservedly so.
intimidated doing your kind of recreation of the Batman Year One pages? Because for me, I felt quite constrained. There's no way to improve on the storytelling, right? It's almost impossible. So I kind of felt locked in by my reverence for the material and the fact that he's just a perfect storyteller. So I didn't think I pushed the envelope far enough for the pages that I contributed.
Yeah, that's actually I know because I think I like got really excited about wanting to be a part of it until I realized what it actually meant to be a part of it. I was like, there's no way in hell I'm gonna like change his layouts or like do like anything like that. So I just stuck to the layout, stuck to it as much as I could, and then just put my crazy Michael Troy stamp on it. And I was happy with the way it turned out. I thought it was fun. So I mean, it was just kind of ridiculous anyway. It's just like a really fun book. Like those projects are a lot of fun, and I'm glad they exist. Um, uh, which of course inspired me to want to do after interviewing Gary Carlson, the co-creator, founder, publisher, along with uh, oh my gosh, uh, Chris Acker, Big Bang. Made me want to do like a big anthology tribute to them. And I thought all I have to do is, it would be a great this treasury sized tabloid and get all these artists that I know to agree to join. And you were definitely at the top of my list. Um, so we signed you up for a brilliant Berserker piece. And then what was the other? You had two pieces initially. It was Berserker and
Doctor Weird, I think.
which one?
It was the Doctor Weird, this psychedelic.
Doctor Weird. Yes, totally amazing. I wish I had the Big Bang to hold up your Berserker right now, but I just would love to ask you about that a little bit because Berserker is like such a cool character. I feel like he's like, Big Bang Comics in general is one of the best kept secrets, but I feel like he's like one of their breakout characters as far as like he could be like, as big as Wolverine or Deadpool or something like that. Just a great name, obviously associated with Keanu Reeves now, but um, the pinup you did is amazing. It's a perfect showcase of Berserker. It looks exactly like a movie poster, and I'm wondering what like your influence was or inspiration behind it. I think you mentioned sumo wrestlers.
Yeah, I think the two biggest inspirations for the Berserker piece was Heavy Metal Magazine and Akira Toriyama. So Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball, he was really good at designing little vehicles and hover ships and all that. And there would be a lot of art or pieces that he did where it would be a hulking figure on a tiny hovercraft. So I kind of took some inspiration. I didn't want. In fact, my first pass on the Berserker pinup on my initial preliminary drawings, it was very generic, more incredible Hulk-like poses and all that. And yeah, I kind of just trashed my initial concept, and I think I was reading some heavy metal magazines at the time, so I wanted this cool sci-fi kind of looking pinup, and I wanted it to have some humor into it as well. So I thought the contrasting the huge hulking figure of Berserker with that tiny hover bike, which was something that I ripped off from Akira Toriyama, was would make for a pretty interesting composition. Because it's tough to kind of I didn't want to Nick Cagnetti, I think, did the other pinup, right? So that was an incredible pinup. So I didn't want to kind of go for that sort of approach, like the big spectacle, very visually impactful. I wanted something a bit quirkier, and that's when I came up with the layout for the Berserker piece that I eventually ended up going with.
Well, I was very happy and proud that Nick actually used my thumbnail for his piece and didn't stray very far from it. So that was the closest I'll ever get to collaborating with Nick Cagnetti. So I was also very happy to have him on the book.
I think I saw your original layouts.
I think it's in the sketchbook section of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. I think you sent it across to me, and then you were kind of inquiring whether I wanted to take a pass at it, but I saw the crop scenes that you had in mind, and I very politely backed off from doing the double page splash, and I thought Nick did a really great job with it.
Yeah, I think it all definitely worked out for the best. Like everything aligned so well on that project, and I'm so proud of it. There's such amazing art. And then I also we got that Ultiman piece from you, which was more of a collaboration because I sent you like a really rough like thumbnail. It was like kind of a parody of George Perez's Superman in history of the DC universe, and then you totally inked it and this penciled it, and it turned out really beautiful. I loved it, and then I got to color it, so that was fun. I love like the collaborative aspect, and then you did a couple of mock ads echoing Bill Sienkiewicz's famous Marvel House ads of Power Man and Iron Fist, like yelling at the reader to buy the book. So we used it as a gimmick to advertise the Kickstarter for Big Bang, and of course, it wound up being in the book. Beautiful, just I colored it, but the ink line work you sent me was just gorgeous, and but once again, very an homage to the original Sienkiewicz art. A little like it echoed it in a certain way, but you brought a lot of different things to it and very much your own style. So how do you approach something like that?
I mean, for me, a piece like that, it's really paying homage to the original artist, but also, yeah, like you mentioned, bringing a bit of my own flavor to it. But more importantly, I just wanted to absorb some of the stylistic little ticks of like Bill Sienkiewicz. Because what I did was, a couple of years ago, I felt that my line work was really stiff because I would be inking with microns and all that. So it gives you a very precise line, but it's a bit too controlled. So there isn't a lot of life in that line. And the exercise I did to try to loosen up my line was really to try to emulate Bill Sienkiewicz's style of inking. Because for me, when you see him inking over, Dennis Cohen or maybe even Sal Buscema in some of the Spider-Man comics, there's a certain level of spontaneity, right, as well as fearlessness. He just kind of attacks and doubles down on whatever he's thinking. In terms of all the slashing strokes and everything. Like the white out, he kind of just runs the white out through the entire page sometimes. And I like that sort of frenetic energy. So I've actually took that and kind of did it as an exercise to really loosen up my line. So when the Big Bang Theory, when the Big Bang anthology came along, right, and you asked me to kind of contribute. I can't quite remember whether it was your suggestion or whether I suggested it to you, but I can't quite remember. It probably was you, because the thing is, as an editor, you're really good at kind of planting the seeds, right? Would you like to do a Sienkiewicz riff? Would you like to do a Frank Miller riff? So you're really good at kind of drawing that out from your contributors. And I was really happy to do the Sienkiewicz piece, and my ultimate objective was really to pay homage to it and to see how much or how closely I could emulate Bill Sienkiewicz's style of inking. So that was really fun. I think I did a passable job, but it wasn't. There's no way. It's really tough to capture that sort of frenetic energy that Bill brings to his artwork. So, but I thought the end result was successful enough. It accomplished what I wanted it to, and I thought you did a great job with the colors. Yeah, I was really happy with a lot of the pieces that we collaborated on.
Yeah, honestly, I've been, I guess, I shouldn't sell myself short, but I feel like I've been really lucky as a colorist. Like, it was very, like, as excited as I was and I knew how much I wanted to do it, it was super intimidating to color you because I was like, I know what it takes for you to like sit down and do something and put time into it. And the end result is always gorgeous. So I wanted to make sure that I honored you. And I'm really happy with the way it came out. It looks really good. It was fun collaborating with you on it. And I'm also very glad that it's treasury size. Like that art, like anytime I look through it, the art is just beautiful. And the artist just got the memo that it was going to be treasury size and, really showcase their art. And it is such a beautiful, brilliant showcase for artists. And and your art really shines. But I guess you've had the fortune on work, because Ghost Agents was mostly, aside from a couple different formats, was mostly treasury. So you got 2 covers on that and a few stories inside. So Jim Rugg, when I talked to him, he said that was part of the draw for like doing our cover. It was the fact that it was treasury size, because I have to say, as you know, as an artist, like who doesn't want to see their art showcased in the best way possible, right?
Yeah, I love the treasury edition formats, right? It just showcases the artwork in the best possible light, and they're so fun to read. So I was really excited when you were telling me that you wanted to kind of publish the book in that sort of treasury edition format. And not that your ego needs more stroking, but I would say you're probably the one of the best editors that I've worked with. The Big Bang anthology project was just a pleasure to be a part of. From start to finish, right? I was going to contribute 2 pieces. I ended up with I don't know 7, 8 pieces maybe, right? And that was well, I think that was a result of you being the sort of silver-tongued editor that you were, right? You just kept adding, more ideas and kind of brought out, I thought, some of the best artwork that I've done to date.
Well, without revealing too many of my editorial secrets, it is a slippery slope because I do feel I do have a certain sort of talent for being able to manipulate. I mean, being able to appeal to people and their strengths, weaknesses, or not weaknesses. Why would you want to appeal to someone's weaknesses? But appeal to their interests or like know what might inspire them or get them excited. and try to, walk that line of not being too pushy. I probably crossed that line a couple of times, but I'm just really voracious about art, and it really was such a great experience. And uh, I'm just so happy that you were part of it, and I'm really glad it exists. Uh, you know, uh, I mean, Big Bang had been around for a long time, so it was important to me to do something special for them to make it, like worth them saying yes to me. I didn't want to hand them a shitty book. Um, and plus the fact that they had never done a treasury size before. So I felt like at least I gave them that, you know what I mean? If not a great book, but it is a great book. So this is the perfect segue though into probably one of the last things we'll talk about today. You're going from treasury size to basically the smallest format comics can possibly be published in, although that's not entirely true. But you go from Big Bang treasury size to Stan versus Jack, How to Feud the Marvel Way. And it's basically the perfect square bound CD booklet size, Instagram friendly format. Um, uh, so what was that like? Yeah, there it is. Amazing book. So obviously your thought process has to be different, like going from big to small. And what influenced your decision to make it that size? And I think I kind of know, but tell us and share your thoughts on that if you will.
Yeah, I knew I wanted to serialize, Stan versus Jack on Instagram. So having it be in the square format kind of, you know, pretty much settled on the format um, very early on in the process since I was going to serialize it on Instagram. Um, and in terms of the final printed book, uh, what I wanted to go for was like a children's story book, right? Like a golden book with the gold trimming and all that. So having it be in a square configuration kind of just worked out in terms of having a bit of flavor of that sort of golden book flavor. So that was really the thought process behind that. And also I wanted to play with different formats. I think it's important to keep things interesting for ourselves from project to project. So, Contraband Comic Cavalcade was pretty much was actually larger than the first edition, which I think you have a copy of, was actually larger than normal comic book size. And when it was published through Cosmic Lion Productions, we published it at regular comic size. And of course, there are the Ghost Agent Treasury. So with this Stan versus Jack book, I was also quite interested in exploring a new format as well, and making it or ensuring that it kind of had that children's book flavor. So that informed the overall thought process behind the final publication.
Well, it's funny because that's the inspiration because it all works together very well up into the fact that there's this a narrator who tells the story who's sort of like a watcher, but a very creepy looking watcher. How did you go about like presenting this story and like because from my point of view, like I loved it because I'm not Team Jack or Stan, you know what I mean? It's like you could argue it for uh till the end of time, but they're both human beings with different stories that came together, and their contributions are undeniable, you know what I mean? So how did you put it together, or what was your approach?
Yeah, for me, what I wanted to do was taking that sort of comic history and being able to present it in a less verbose manner. So I wanted to keep it light. So that's why I brought in the whole the Watcher storytelling device to keep it kind of conversational. I didn't want it to be a blow by blow historical sort of document that would be in sequential order. I wanted it to be more conversational, almost like an illustrated conversation between comic fans, right? So to keep it light. And I think that approach was inspired by, Chuck Palahniuk, the guy who wrote Fight Club. I always thought that his books were very snappy, very conversational. So I wanted to bring that to the book, because depending on how you approach or how you tell the story, it can get pretty tedious trying to get all that detail and all that comic history, into the page. So for me, it was really figuring out the story that I wanted to tell and what's the best way to tell that story. And I knew that I wanted it to be a bit snappier, so I introduced the device of the degenerate watcher. Interestingly enough, I handed a copy of the book to my intern, and she was convinced that the degenerate watcher was based on me in terms of his his speech patterns and all of that. And maybe she's right. But yeah, it was just supposed to be a parody of Uatu, the Watcher, and I thought that would be interesting. It would be more interesting than, for example, featuring me as a narrator, like the way John Byrne used to do in some of his comics. Right, he kind of broke the fourth wall and made himself a narrator. But I wouldn't think it would work, because if I were to introduce a cartoon version of me, who was I to kind of espouse on or kind of weigh in on this debate on Stan and Jack, right? So I thought it would be better to have a sort of a watcher type character narrate the whole story, and also convey my viewpoints and my own opinions through this particular character. Yeah, so that was the thoughts behind the overall storytelling. It was pretty interesting, because in terms of how I went about putting the story together, uh, for this book it was a bit different. So I was on holiday, actually. So I was taking a swim and all that, and I was reading the Stanley True Believer book, right, which was pretty much skewed to the more negative end in terms of how they portrayed Stan Lee. So the whole idea came to me because I felt that the pendulum really swung to the other side after Stan died, right? He went from being this beloved father figure to being kind of the scum of the universe, right? Some of the fans and all that. The thing about comic book fans is maybe we've been reading too many comics, so we see things in very black and white terms, right? Jack Kirby is a god, Stan Lee is the scum of the universe, is the most deplorable human being ever. And I thought that the truth kind of lay somewhere in between, right? Jack Kirby has his own flaws as well. Stan Lee was a very complex human being. So I wanted to kind of explore that dynamic and really have bring a more even-handed and objective, do a more objective take on the subject. So it had to be fact-based, right? We had to kind of start from the facts, and then the watcher characters would then interject with a lot of my personal opinions of the conflict between Stan and Jack. And really my thoughts are, people think that Stan Lee is kind of a glory hog, right? He's this guy who enjoys the sort of fame, and he wanted to take all the credit from Jack Kirby, or so a lot of people felt. But for me, I have a kind of a different perspective on the whole thing, because back then, right, I don't think even Stan could foresee how big the Marvel movies was going to be. So when he was kind of putting himself out there as the face of Marvel, as Stan the Man, creating this persona for himself, I don't think it was for the fame and fortune, because if you wanted fame and fortune, you wouldn't join the comic book industry, at least not in the 50s and 40s, right? You probably kind of try to be an actor or something. Rather, I think him positioning himself as the face of Marvel really came from a more practical stance, which was kind of let Chip go and made Stan the publisher because they knew that Stan Lee, in terms of his contribution or his importance to Marvel, was definitely greater than Chip Goodman could ever aspire to. So in some ways, he did kind of weatherproof his rice bowl. So I think all this, him grabbing the credit, making himself the public face of Marvel, really came from a very practical place, which was him holding on to, was him holding on to his rice bowl. Because at the end of the day, and correct me, or rather, I'm sure you've heard this story before, right? This kid grows up in the Depression, decides to join the comic book industry, ends up becoming one of the most well-known figures in the comic book industry. That's the Jack Kirby story. That's the Stan Lee story as well. To a certain degree, Jack was always about, I need to kind of sell books, I need to put food on the table. And Stan Lee was the same. He needed to fund the lifestyles of, his wife and his daughter JC. So essentially, I thought that both Stan and Jack were really similar in certain ways, but they kind of went about things differently. Ultimately, Jack just wanted to be a creative figure. He didn't want to deal with the business side of things, while Stan kind of was happy being a corporate puppet. So that's where these two men diverged. Diverged. I don't think their story is really a David versus Goliath type story. Jack Kirby against this big corporation. Even though Stan was the face of the corporation, Stan got screwed by Marvel as well. He didn't own the characters. And, in the 90s, they kind of let him go, right? He was chairman emeritus and all that, but they felt that, probably it wasn't worth paying Stan Lee $1 million a year sort of thing. So they kind of let him go, and that's when he went to DC. So I kind of felt that was a story worth exploring, and I thought I could kind of deliver more even-handed take on the particular subject. Yeah.
Well, I think you did it very well. I think it was smart to use a narrator like that. It reads like a very entertaining documentary. But it is interesting about Stan and Jack because Stan Lee became Stan Lee when he was kind of long in the tooth. He was later in life. He was frustrated. He didn't want to be doing what he was doing. I feel like his responsibilities kind of echoed a lot of Jim Shooter's sentiment. And he had a bad rap, but both of their interests were pretty much the same. Marvel was always very close to going out of business. They were constantly having to come up with gimmicks and ideas to make money and pay the bills and keep the lights on. And, Stan had this opportunity to be the great voice of Marvel, and he went in for it whole hog. Jack Kirby, I think he would have gladly had by his side, but that wasn't Jack's personality. Jack was not, into the limelight and all that. So they both sort of landed where they were supposed to. That said, it's just a great, brilliant comic book. It's the perfect, fair examination of, a very misunderstood, very nuanced kind of feud, and it is beautifully drawn. If there's ever an opportunity to publish it in a larger format, I would be happy to see that. So yeah, everyone needs to definitely pick up Stan versus Jack. It's so good. I hope Eli definitely submits it for the Eisners next year because I know people don't like to hear stuff like that, but it is that good. It is very I knew you were working on it behind the scenes, and I thought it was going to be a lot smaller in scope, knowing how much time you have to dedicate to things like this. So it's amazing that it's this 100-page, gorgeous graphic novel. So congratulations.
Yeah, I kind of figured a way to make it work, which was really the whole Instagram thing really worked because essentially every page was simply a panel. I couldn't do it as a standard comic book because there's no way I would be able to put out like a page after page of multi-panel pages and all that, but rather I saw each page in the Stan versus Jack book almost like a singular panel, which made it definitely less intimidating for me to work on. So I just had to kind of every day just work on this one panel, and probably at the end of the week I would be able to maybe churn out two or three panels at least. So over time it kind of you build up a bit of steam, and before you know it, maybe after a couple of months, it's literally 100 plus. No, I don't think it's 100 pages, maybe like 80 pages.
80 pages. I knew it was substantial. That's still super impressive. So, um, is is there anything else you're working on right now? Do you have anything in planning stages or anything you'd like to share with us that you might have in the works?
In terms of a long form comics work, currently I think it's pretty hectic in terms of my day job. So I haven't really um, gotten deep into my next long form project. But in terms of overall comics work, I believe my next illustration is going to appear in a project that you're working on. So I managed to squeeze that particular illustration out, before things started to really ramp up with my day job. So, and to be honest, I haven't actually done any comic book work since I submitted that illustration to you. So I think it's going to be slow going. Um, at least for now, it's going to be random pinups, random illustrations, and maybe two-page stories here and there. But I'm sure down the line, um, when I have an idea that's compelling enough, I'll probably explore it. The closest or the idea I'm most keen about would probably be a Jack Kirby fanzine, tentatively called the Cult of Kirby. So it's going to have opinion pieces, written articles, artwork. It could be me inking an old Jack Kirby story, or developing. I think I spoke to this about you. I wanted to do like Jack Kirby's Dune, which was, what if Jack Kirby designed or worked on a Dune comic back in the 70s when he went back to Marvel instead of, 2001 A Space Odyssey. So that's something that I think would eventually find its way into this Jack Kirby fanzine that I spoke about, that or rather I just told you about.
Well, that sounds amazing. You have a very impressive body of work already, and I love your art. You're one of the most talented artists I know. I love working with you. I love reading your stuff. I love looking at your art, and I always look forward to what you're doing next. And that's the perfect segue for um, the best way to end this conversation is to let everyone know what we're talking about, and that is I'm launching a Kickstarter on Tuesday that Barry has contributed a beautiful pinup for. It's going to be, apparently, I'm the 80s nostalgia guy because it's going to be an Elemental's anniversary tribute book that's going to have lots of new art, lots of old art, articles, interviews, and just whatever I can find to put in. I'm excited to tell you, Barry, that I've been able to track down a lot of the original art. Like there's this website called Comic Art Fans, and it has a lot of people post their original art that they own. And you can contact them, and a lot of people have been sending me files for original art. So there's going to be a sort of artist edition section in the book featuring a bunch of like pencils of old elementals art. So I'm very excited about that. Um, there's a lot of new art because I always have to have new art. Because elementals is supposedly public domain now, and some of the inspiration is like what people might do with the property now. So Barry did this amazing pinup. It's based on the Super Friends cartoon, very like an homage, love letter to Alex Toth, and it is super cute, super fun. It will definitely be in the book and part of the project. So thank you for doing that for me and squeezing it in. I'm so happy to have it in the book.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to contribute to the book. It's always a great time working with you as editor. And is it going to be treasury sized as well?
You know, it's supposedly not, but sitting here talking to you, okay, so I the last thought I had on this is that if not treasury size, at least magazine size. And if for some strange reason this Kickstarter, I tried to do like kind of a modest Kickstarter because I don't have uh, Eli holding my hand this time and the power of Cosmic Lion behind me. It's the first Michael Fitzgerald Troy solo book. And although Eli's been helping me behind the scenes, he'll always be my spiritual guide. Uh, but I didn't want to like blow the Kickstarter and not be able to make the book. But if it makes enough money to pay for printing of a tabloid size, a treasury size, I'm going to do it because I just have to. Like I can't. How can I not?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
my brand.
Especially with you mentioning the original art pages, the scans of the original art, that's going to look really good, treasury sized.
That's kind of actually was the inspiration for it because I was like, oh, because initially, like a few pieces I just got to recolor. But then as I was finding all this art, and as you know, I love artist editions and I love seeing this stuff, and people really will be getting, I mean, as much fun as the new material is going to be, you know, this is a celebration of Bill Willingham and the Elementals. So I wanted to include as much of that as possible. And I feel like that's what people really want to see. So then I thought I was going to recolor it, but then when I was seeing the stance, I was like, oh no, this is like needs to be seen like this. And then I thought, well, how exciting is that at standard comic book form? So we need to make this a little bigger. So we'll see what happens. It's all up to you, viewers. Throw your money at this project and we'll make a big ass gorgeous book for you. How about that?
And is it going to be a complete story or at least a complete sequence in terms of the original art?
There it kind of echoes what I did with the Big Bang anthology. There are only a handful of new short stories. Jason Foster and I are doing a three-page story. Brian Payne, of course, is here, and
The dream.
he did a three-page story and a two-page story. I'm actually going to do like sort of a lead story. I'm not sure how it's going to be, but it's going to sort of you know, almost like Elemental's grand design, just sort of tell like, you know, what happened so far. Just, I don't know. But I love the Elementals. I love Bill Willingham. I feel he's very in line with like a John Byrne, my favorite comic book artist. And Elementals was my gateway to indie comics. So, and if I thought Big Bang was obscure, oh my God, trying to find artists for this book, no one's heard of Elementals. Of course, the ones that have are as voracious for it as I am. Um, but I'm excited to bring it to the world. Elementals has been languishing in unpublishing hell for way too long. And this isn't a relaunch. This isn't a new book. I don't have the rights to them. This is just a tribute, a celebration, and just sort of like I don't know, a footnote in history. You know what I mean? It's it's my VH1 behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think if the Big Bang anthology is any indication, I think the new Elementals book is it's going to be pretty fantastic.
I can't like just looking at the files this morning. It's already shaping up to be like really good, and it's kind of evolving. So I'm very excited to see where it goes and where it winds up. And you know, I'm very happy to have you on my first solo project. You were one of my all stars on Big Bang, of course, and I'm always happy to work with you. And I'm very happy that you were, you know, I'm going to let you go here because it's super late in Singapore. You need to go to sleep. And I'm glad that we were able to work this out and arrange this. It's nice to finally talk to you in person, sort of, or at least face to face after gossiping, dishing, chewing the fat on all things comic behind the scenes for a couple of years now. So thanks so much for doing this, Barry. I really appreciate this. I enjoy all your art. You're so talented. You're so amazing. You're a totally nice guy. And I implore everyone to look at the description in the video, go to Cosmic Lion Productions and buy the Big Bang Anthology, buy Comic Cavalcade, buy Ghost Agents, buy, most importantly, Stan versus Jack, How to Feud the Marvel Way, the soon to be Eisner award winning book from Barry Tan.
Thanks a lot for having me, Michael. It's been a fun conversation for me as well.
You're welcome. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for watching, and I will bring you more later. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we will keep you updated on the Elementals project that Barry is a part of, and all of other Barry's projects as well. You can scan my channel for reviews on much of his work. And once again, thanks, Barry. Take care, okay?
Thank you.
All right, bye now.